test it out now, and if you are happy to be here, clap your hands, or do an outreach with the thing that explodes if you want to use those reactions. And if you would like to tell us where, if you'd like to tell us where you're from, yes, hi everyone, let us know where you're from in the chat function. So the chat is open. It's for everyone to share. If you would like to connect with other people online or tell us a bit about yourselves, please put your LinkedIn profile on the chat function so we know where you're from, and what you're doing and what you're up to and how you feel about what's going on. But if you want to ask the panel any questions on the discussion today, please wait, don't put it in the chat function, because we're going to lose it with the number of people we have online today. Please use the Q&A function. If you can't find all of these functions that I'm talking about, click your Alt key, your Alt key on your keyboard. That will bring up the functionality for you. So in the Q&A function, please pop your questions in there. We're going to have quite a bit of time at the end of the colloquium to ask your questions of the speakers. And for those who are regulars at the GGA, we might even reach out to you to see if you don't want to ask your question in person. So please watch your chat box. I might be reaching out to you to see if you are willing, if it's not the early hours of the morning and you're still getting dressed, if you are willing to join us live to ask your questions of the speakers. We are live streaming to YouTube. So if anyone hasn't been able to register or join and they're trying to contact you in terms of how they can join, they're welcome to go to our YouTube channel. If you type in @GoGovern, as in good governance, GoGovern, you'll be able to get to the Good Governance Academy website. For those people who don't know about the Good Governance Academy, Professor King's founded the Good Governance Academy in 2019. We bring together thought leaders like we have on the webinar today, global thought leaders, to talk about critical business issues, essentially to educate the educator. In other words, to provide up-to-date current thinking to leadership of organizations, as well as the educators in business schools and formal education facilities, and also our professional membership bodies and professional associations who are our members, or our support members, as we call them. Today, the Good Governance Academy has colloquia twice a year, and we have a presence in 137 countries. It's debatable in terms of how many people we're actually accessing or are coming to watch our videos and our webinars, but we generally in a year have more than 20,000 people, unique individuals joining our webinars and our events and our colloquia during a single year period. So thank you everyone for being here today. We are going to start then with Professor King to introduce the topic of today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, and good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, and maybe good evening to some of you. Today's talk is focused on the public sector. And the public sector in every jurisdiction in the world is of great importance, because it happens in most jurisdictions to be one of the biggest investor in infrastructure, for example, and one of the biggest employers. And the expectation from the citizenry of a country is such an entity should act ethically and should be transparent in what it's reporting, and should act believing what it's doing is in the best interests of the citizens of the country. Our mission, the GGA, is about thought leadership in governance itself and critical business issues, as Karen has said. As previous colloquia have shown, through our support members such as the AICPA, the ICAEW, IOD UK, IOD India, etc., we have 181 support members around the world. Our last colloquium, in the summary of what happens with our speakers, Carolyn summarizes and I edit And the summary goes to our support members who send it to their members. So that summary of our last colloquium went to 4.8 million directors, accountants, and other professionals in 137 countries. So you can see the reach of the GGA and the importance of spreading the kind of knowledge and things we're going to talk about today. So the public sector, the beneficiary of what happens with public sector entities, needs an understanding and engagement with public sector entities to ensure that they are actually acting with good governance and transparently reporting. We've had our corruption experiences in South Africa, where Karen and I reside, and we had a commission under our then Chief Justice, Justice Zondo, called the Zondo Commission. And the evidence showed that a family of persons, together with certain politicians, had actually captured parts of the state and parts of the entities of the state, such as our energy provider. And so citizens need to be informed about what is happening and need to engage with these public institutions and protest if necessary, if it is seen that corruption is happening and or they're not reporting in a transparent manner, and the public is not satisfied with what is happening. Today, we will learn from experts about the mechanisms that support ethical governance and how we need to educate our citizens on good governance by the public sector and the adverse impact on them when this does not happen. Our speakers today will explore the setting of high standards of governance for the public sector and empowering citizens with knowledge to hold institutions accountable. I hope it will inspire every citizen in the countries online to champion quality governance, integrity, and transparency in our public sectors. In South Africa, we have legislation, the Public Finance Management Act of 1999. It deals with the public finance management situation for expenditure, accounting, and reporting for public entities. It goes against the premise of the King report, King Committee, which I chaired for 27 years and assumed my name, because I said, and we said, that the code, there should not be legislation about this code, because many people call for it to have teeth with parliamentary approval. And my stance was actually peer pressure and market forces is a better way of enforcing the quality of governance than by passing laws and saying you shall act ethically. How does one really enforce that? Subordinate legislation is a different matter. And that's why I approached the then chair of our Johannesburg Stock Exchange, Roy Anderson, and he agreed with me this was a critical aspect for our listed companies. And it became a listing requirement on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the King Code. The first report was novel in the sense we moved away from the primacy of the shareholder. We said that what the intention of the Companies Act and the common law situation of limited liability companies was that the board, which is the governance structure of the limited liability company appointed by the shareholders, should be able to report in a manner that is clear, concise, and understandable. This was interesting because I was chair of the United Nations on Governance and Oversight and had many meetings in Geneva with the leaders of IFAC at the time, Gordon Lindstrom and Ball, many of you will remember them. And we came to three conclusions. Firstly, financial reporting was critical, but on its own, clearly not sufficient, because evidence showed empirically and theoretically that the makeup of the market cap of companies in the great stock exchanges of the world, only about 20% of that value, market capitalization, was being represented in the financial statements. The rest was made up of what was then called intangible assets, then non-financial aspects, then ESG issues. So directors have to steer the company, because direct comes from the Latin word to steer. But when government is the sole shareholder, it's common to say about government is the owner of the XYZ public company. Well, research has shown, and teaching at Harvard, Cornell, Cambridge, other great academic institutions, that it's completely wrong to say that shareholders own the company, because they have none of the attributes of being an owner. The attributes of an owner is you can deal with the thing, you can break it, you can sell it, you can do what you like with it. But the shareholder cannot do that with the assets of the company, which are owned by the company. And of course, the company has its own liability. Hence, the shareholder has no duty or responsibility to the company itself. But if the shareholder is a financial institution or the government, they have beneficiaries, the citizens of the country, and they should make sure they're appointing directors with the necessary skills to carry out and the intent and the purpose for which the company has been formed. So the PFMA, unfortunately, has not worked, as I certainly predicted in the year 2000, when I said that one cannot legislate for ethics, and to take line by line as to how you should manage would result in time being spent on conformance instead of focusing on performance. And that's exactly what has happened. In our public sector institutions and public sector owned companies, we have a situation where there's a 10-year jail term for non-compliance. And so if you were a director or an official employed by a public sector company, you would also spend most of your time on conformance, with that sort of Damocles hanging over your head. So today we will learn from Auditors General of their difficulties in auditing public sector companies. How public sector companies are going to source the necessary sustainability data in order to do sustainability reports, which over the next 2 years will become mandatory globally for international trade purposes. The EU has already mandated and legislated the double materiality standards. The IFRS has formed the International Sustainability Standards Board, which has effectively a single materiality standard, the risks and opportunities and impacts from just the financial sector. And with a principle of interoperability, that if you have impacts from inside the company on the 3 critical dimensions for sustainable development, well, you would look at how the GRI has got a standard and use that to report on something material, because if you don't report something material, it has the same legal consequence as a false material utterance. So we live in a very changed world a world that is crying out for us to fulfill our awesome responsibility as the primary creature on planet Earth to ensure that it is sustainable, certainly by the end of the century. We cannot live in a world with constant temperatures of 40, 50 degrees centigrade. There's a reason for all the creatures on planet Earth. They form an ecological system which has kept the balance on the planet. And we, Homo sapiens, have interfered with that balance. We have taken waste and discharged it directly into rivers that's flowed into seas and created dead zones in the seas. And this disabled fish to live in those areas. So the question is, can one legislate for ethical behavior? The answer is resoundingly in the negative. That is why I have always maintained that really it's an application, the original intellectual thinking and an appreciation that the limited liability company is an incapacitated person, never to be touched because it's intangible, never to be seen because it's a legal fiction. And when you become a director, you actually become a guardian, as you would be the guardian of an incapacitated human being. And you have to care for the assets and the business affairs of the company. And so we have Auditor Generals today of the UK and South Africa who will be talking to us. So the government has the duty to appoint directors with the necessary skill for the citizens of a country, not to appoint directors who may be supportive of the political party making up the government of the country, because that actually fails in their duty in the best interest of the beneficiaries. So today is a colloquium of critical importance globally. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mervyn. I'd like to now introduce John Rondell. Really good introduction. Thank you, Mervyn. John, would you like to take over? Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you. And if I could have the slides, please. But in the meantime, thank you, Mervyn. Good morning from the OECD in Paris. It is a great pleasure to be with you this morning. I thank the Good Governance Academy for this kind invitation. It is a real honor to be the first speaker at the first event devoted to public sector issues that the Good Governance Academy has. So a double thank you. The importance of our governments and public finances has been very well stated in the introduction. And we face a number of challenges in this area. I will be focusing on public finances. We have high deficits and high debt. This was the situation before COVID. COVID only made it worse. We have large and compelling spending pressures. We have healthcare, social care, aging of the population, the green transition, national defense, the list goes on and on. At the same time, we need to focus on fiscal sustainability issues. We cannot continue running deficits and ever larger debts. So we need to reconcile these two, the large spending pressures and the need for fiscal sustainability. Difficult decisions will need to be made. And by definition, strong political will is necessary. But what aggravates the situation very fundamentally is that there is almost a total lack of public understanding of these issues. Next slide, please. We believe the good governance of our public finances requires quality institutions, absolutely. But it also requires empowering public understanding. I will be focusing on empowering public understanding in my presentation, and I think this picture captures it well. The quality budget institutions are represented by the boat, and the empowering public understanding is represented by the rowing. Only both of them are absolutely critical, and only by both working together are we likely to achieve the desired results. Empowering public understanding is absolutely fundamental, and this is critical to our work at the OECD on good governance for public finances. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by empowering public understanding? I have grouped them into 4 categories here. The first is we need strong fiscal advocates. We need to promote public fiscal literacy among the public. We need genuine citizen dialogue on these issues, and we need to use innovative communications to reach and interact with the public on these issues. And I will now briefly go through each of these 4. Thank you. If you could move to the next slide, please. So on fiscal advocacy, it is clear that we need fiscal advocates that go out there publicly, state the challenges we are facing, the fiscal risks that we face if we don't do anything, that the earlier we take action, the more likely we are to succeed. It is absolutely critical to have fiscal advocates, but who should be these fiscal advocates? It is very clear that it is not the Ministry of Finance. It is hard to imagine shortly after a budget being published or presented to Parliament by the Minister of Finance that another arm of the Ministry of Finance would come out about challenges that the budget that was just introduced may not be in accordance with. So the Ministry of Finance is not in a good role to be fiscal advocates in this context. But we are lucky in our countries to have 2 types of institutions that are almost designed for this role: supreme audit institutions and independent fiscal institutions such as fiscal councils. We believe they need to embrace the spotlight more, be provocative, grab attention, to focus attention on these issues. We have, however, observed in our work that there is a reluctance among these institutions to take on this role. They are, of course, exceptions to this, but in general, there is a reticence to embrace this role of fiscal advocacy among these institutions. So we here at the OECD, when we interact with these bodies, we say, if not you, if not audit offices, if not fiscal councils, if not independent fiscal institutions, then who? But we are not asking these bodies to advocate a specific policy action in order that you should raise this tax, you should cut this program. It is simply to raise awareness of the need to take action. Next slide, please. On fiscal literacy, I think at the outset, it's probably fair to say that most of us on this call are experts on public finance issues. That is not very representative of the public. The public faces challenges for fiscal literacy. Elected officials face challenges for fiscal literacy, and the media faces challenges when it comes to fiscal literacy. When we have discussions with the public, most people are incredibly surprised in OECD countries to find out that the largest single area of public spending goes on interest on the debt. That is the biggest surprise for most people. Then we go and ask people, what do you think the government is spending your money on? And the list that people come up with about what the government is spending money on is so far, far away than the reality that we need to communicate much better to the public than we do. We tend to communicate with the public as experts, but they are not experts on these issues. We need to adjust our communication. In one of our more memorable interchanges, a person said that when the Ministry of Finance is speaking to me about fiscal issues, they may as well be speaking in a foreign language. It is ununderstandable. When it comes to elected officials, if you look at the profile of elected officials, they can be lawyers, they can be doctors, they can come from many professions. What they are generally not is budget and public finance experts. So they face many of the same issues at the public when they are dealing with public finance issues. But it is a narrower group that we can focus on to enhance their literacy. There is training in most of our countries for members of parliament when they join parliament and when they start working on budget and public finance committees. But that training, we have found out, is very much focused on the procedures of budgeting, the procedures of auditing. It is not focused on the substantive issues that they are dealing with. So we believe we need to reorient the training for members of parliament, our interactions with parliament, in such a way that we start discussing the substantive issues more. The media has a very difficult job. They face very tight deadlines. They are under a lot of pressures to do this, and it is very complex, these issues for them. There are very few media outlets that have experts on public finance, and those media outlets tend not to be the outlets that the general public reads. So the reporters, the journalists that are reporting to the general public on these issues often face the same literacy challenges. So targeted campaigns to help the media understand our public finances is absolutely essential. Next slide, please. When it comes to citizen dialogue, we need to give citizens a voice in this process. Very few citizens would know how to make their voice heard in this process. Sometimes it is because they are not aware of the processes in place, but in many other cases, it is because there are no processes in place. Parliaments, of course, play a key role here, and the committees of parliaments. And there is probably no aspect of public finances that varies more from one country to another than the role of parliament in the budget process. And I think if you look at parliaments that is strongly engaged with citizens, where each committee of parliament has hearings to focus on their specific areas of the budget, it invites citizens, it invites citizen groups, NGOs, citizens groups to come in, civil society groups to discuss the budget. It's an entirely different feeling you have around the public finances because citizens feel they have a voice. The public don't necessarily expect the government immediately to act on all of their priorities that they state in these discussions. The point is to give them an avenue to have a voice, that is a genuine dialogue, that the government understands what they are saying, they understand the pressures, and they may very well have an impact on how the government reorients its program going forward. But it cannot be, and empowering public understanding cannot just be a one-way street. There needs to be an avenue for citizens to also talk back, if you will, to governments. And the last item that I would like to talk about is innovative communications. So if we could have the next slide. Normally, when we talk about innovative communications, it is in a negative context, the negative aspects of innovative communications, the social media, what it's doing to our democracies, what it's doing to our societies. But this is also a great opportunity to interact with different groups in society that maybe we have not been able to reach before. And I think governments need to embrace this much more than they do currently in the area of public finances. If I take an example just with ChatGPT, you can ask ChatGPT anything at the moment. You can ask it anything about public finances at the moment. How much does the government spend on this? What are the largest spending programs of governments? Anything that you may imagine. How do I interact with the budget process if I want to? In almost every case, you would probably get the wrong answer now. So it is imperative for governments to organize their databases on public finance in such a manner that when you ask a question, you get the correct answer or are more likely to get the correct answers. and just to have this as another vehicle to interact with citizens. So with that, and the next slide, please. I just thank you very much for your kind attention. This is a new area of work at the OECD, which I think chimes very well with what you said in your introductions, Mervyn. Sort of having laws in place, having rules in place is not enough. You need to have their implementation, a focus on it. And I think it's very similar here. Institutions are fundamental, but you need to have a public understanding of these issues to drive success. So thank you very much again for the kind invitation and your kind attention.
Thank you very much, John. It was really well received. I'd like to hand over the reins of the colloquium to Ian Carruthers of IPSASB, and he's got lots of new information he'd like to share as well. But thank you very much, everybody online. If you have got any questions, please remember to put them in the Q&A function. Any questions for John on his presentation? Thank you very much. Ian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen, and if you can confirm that you can actually see the slides. Carolyn?
Not yet.
Mm-hmm.
The big green button at the bottom.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes, it's coming online now. Thank you, Ian.
Okay.
And I will, during your presentation, I will make sure that they're shared online as well.
Okay.
So on the event page. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here in my capacity as chairman of the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. But in terms of the presentation, I also want to set standards in the broader context. I think, as Professor King said in his introduction, financial reporting is very much part of the picture, but it's very much not the whole story. So what I also want to do is set in the context of good governance for the public sector. And this was an area that the International Federation of Accountants worked together with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy on to produce the International Framework for Good Governance in the Public Sector. And Professor King very kindly provided the foreword for that. So I'll refer to that. Also some work on the whole system of public financial management, which CIPFA did. All of which brings together that whole picture of governance and public financial management. So if I start, and this is really where the strategic objective for the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board is strengthening public financial management. And really that starts from the point that strong public financial management is essential, and it's all about trust fundamentally. And then all right, I'm just trying to move my screen forward, which doesn't seem to be working at the moment.
If you click on the screen,
okay, that's fine. It's moved. Okay, and really, because of the pervasive impact of public financial management, if you don't have strong public financial management, that is going to encourage waste, and money is not going to be used in the way that it was intended, in terms of encouraging fraud and corruption. Inevitably, if citizens see the public money not being spent well, they become less willing to pay taxes, and then of course you end up in a vicious cycle, because if you have less money, then that impacts on the ability to provide services and so on. So it's a downward spiral, and it's not just within the public sector. Obviously, government is a key enabler in terms of the rest of the economy, and as those effects ripple out, then you can see the perception in terms of external providers of finance as well. That increases the amount spent on debt, and I think that refers back then into John's comments about where money is spent. And this is all interlinked. You can't, if you don't have you can't have strong public financial management without strong governance. If you don't have strong governance, that's going to impact on public financial management. So this is where I move on and talk then about the international framework for good governance in the public sector. Very much, and I think this has already been mentioned, when we were developing the framework, the key difference that we saw with governance in the public sector was the idea about acting in the public interest at all times. Absolutely, one of the fundamentals to this. Then in the framework, what we were trying to do was actually say that good governance really depends on the organisation being clear on what its objectives are and how it is delivering its objectives, and then being accountable for its delivery of those objectives. So one of the key principles then is actually defining the outcomes, and it very much depends on this idea about inputs, outputs, and outcomes, and that links in with the ideas around integrated thinking and integrated reporting, and being clear about that those outcomes are set in the context of sustainability, not only financial sustainability, but also economic and social and environmental sustainability. And then having been clear about what is the organisation being there to do, that you should then think, okay, not actually how do I fit those outcomes to what the organisation is, but actually the organisation is then clear about how it configures itself in order to deliver. And that means not only services provided directly within the organisation, but those that are brought in from the outside, and that you need to make sure that the resources are not only financial, their relationship, their development of human capital, and so on. So again, this all depends on thinking about it in an integrated way in terms of how the organisation operates. And then this is where you start to link into ideas about strong public financial management, because you need standards, you need strong external, you need regular reporting, and you need assurance on that report. And then looking at this in terms of the whole system approach, which in the Sit for Whole system approach, it's directed towards delivery of outcomes. The premise there is that actually the fundamental is actually that you need accrual-based information. You really need to understand what the government owns, what it owes, what it is costing to deliver those services. Cash is not going to give you that. So the fundamental there is accrual-based information. And I mentioned there the role of strong financial reporting standards, as well in terms of regular publication of information and the importance of scrutiny of that information. That's not just scrutiny internally within the organisation, it's also external scrutiny, and that's where the framework of strong external and independent external audit, but also scrutiny in terms of legislature, committees, and therefore then accountability back to the public comes in. So that's really the framework that the whole system advocates. And the key there, and I think this goes back to earlier points, is that not that you can strengthen any one part of the framework, it's actually about how the whole framework, both governance and public financial management elements, come together. So it's not enough just to strengthen the budget processes. Actually, you need the right standards, you need the right systems, and you need, above all, you need the right governance around it. So then bringing it back to the role of international public sector accounting standards, we see this as very much in terms of credibility, and in terms of being held to account. What you see amongst a number of governments that have actually implemented international standards, for example, the government in Colombia, as part of moving forward past its previous challenges, actually decided to implement international standards, IPSAS among those, because of credibility. They wanted to demonstrate the standards to which they were being held. So the importance of those standards being set by an independent international board, the importance of standards for the public sector being anchored in the relevant parts of private sector accounting. So not the plea that public sector is different, but actually making sure that where transactions are the same, they're accounted for the same in the same way as for other sectors of the economy, but equally that those standards actually provide the necessary public sector specificities and the necessary public sector perspective in order to provide a credible view. And that being part of transparency, and that rippling back to where I started in terms of trust, and that that transparency is being transparent to those who have approved the finance, so that's to the legislature, but also then through that to the electorate. And I think John made the very powerful comments there in terms of how you actually not report the detail, but how you provide the bigger picture to enable people to understand that and to comment on that. I think that's very important. And then going to the point about the way in which the cost of servicing debt can actually very much crowd out other public services, that being important, that actually if you are transparent, if you are being held to account by international standards, that as IMF research has showed, will have an impact on your costs of raising finance. And it's not just about international comparability. That is absolutely crucial, comparability between jurisdictions, but I think it also has an important impact on the way in which jurisdictions, officials working within jurisdictions actually can provide an independent view, because it certainly, and I speak as a former government finance official, I think it is very helpful if actually, in terms of speaking truth unto power, you can actually say, these are international standards. This is not just something that I'm telling you that you need to do. This is actually, there is an international consensus on this, and therefore this is how we need to approach this. And so that helps with accountability, but it should also help with decision making. And certainly those are the twin objectives set within our conceptual framework in terms of the objectives of financial reporting from a public sector context. Now I want to finish off by just then talking about moving these principles out into the area of sustainability, and this is where Carolyn referred in the introduction to the recent publication by IPSASB of the draft of the first ever sustainability reporting standard specifically for the public sector. And in developing that exposure draft, we've very much drawn on all of this thinking, particularly thinking about outcomes. We have thought about the more general concept of impacts, and what we see is that outcomes are the direct impacts of government activities, in this case on climate, but again that could be on other areas, and very much it comes back then to accountability for delivery of those outcomes as a result of the activities of the organisation, and the efficiency and the effectiveness of that expenditure being driven by strong governance. And so the ideas in the draft sustainability reporting standard very much link with that, and the thinking behind it in terms of the TCFD framework, governance strategy, managing risks and metrics, of course, founded then on integrated reporting and integrated thinking. And I will just bring my session to a close by saying that the international framework that I referred to that IFAC and CITFA develops, which is incidentally the foundation for the work in Pathways to Accrual, which is an IFAC portal. We are in the process, the early stages of updating that to bring it up to date with thinking in various different areas and also to reflect experience in practice. And certainly if anybody is interested in getting involved in that, I would certainly be very pleased to hear from them. So with that, Carolyn, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for participating being allowed to participate in the panel, and I look forward to listening to the other presentations and indeed to the panel discussion later.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'd like to invite Ed to come and speak to us now. I'll just ask Evelyn if you could please share Ed's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And warm greetings to everyone from DC. I know you've all been listening attentively to Washington, DC in the past day or couple of days. Many thanks to the Good Governance Academy for inviting me to this event. In my presentation, I am going to be focusing on why and how governments should enhance governance and accountability. And towards the end of the presentation, I would like to link what I've said with supreme audit institutions and their role that I think is going to be the focus of the next session. Next slide. The issue of trust or lack thereof made headlines in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Trust in public institutions became really very prominent with the rise of social media. And it has been topical since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. There are various statistics on trust in government, but I'm just going to focus on two of them. But all the statistics point to the fact that trust in government is low. And as Hin was saying earlier on, a lot of what government do, like public finance and stuff like that, is really geared toward increasing trust. So we have a publication from OECD focused on OECD countries in 2023. It showed that trust in OECD countries is low. Trust in national governments. Let me give some highlights of the survey. About 39% of people that were surveyed said that they had high or moderately high trust in their national governments. 44% had no or low trust at all. Then we can also look at the statistical index, which is an online index. The global average, according to that index, for national government across the world is 51%. You see that that is very similar to the 39% that has high or moderately low, high or moderately high trust in national governments in OECD countries. Then if you look at the slide carefully, you will see that there is a mix of Asia and Middle East countries like Saudi Arabia, China, United Arab Emirates, Singapore, and India above the global average of 51%. In the same way, if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, you will see that many Western democracies and notable African and Latin American countries scored below the global average. I know many of you will have different questions on your mind as to why China is there, why United Arab is there, or why South Africa or Argentina is ranked in that manner. But let's try and unpack this issue of trust. Next slide. So question is, why is trust in government low? To better understand this, let's look at the drivers of trust. And again, I'm going to go to the framework that OECD provided, because I looked at the various OECD framework for evaluating trust. I think the one provided by OECD is really very self-explanatory. So OECD identified two key drivers of trust. The first one is competence. And by competence, it is, does a government, is a government perceived to be competent? And does it have the capacity to deliver the commitment? Or if we want to put it in a very layman language, is the government reliable and responsive? The second driver of trust that OECD identified is value. And that is whether a government is perceived to operate consistently with a set of values that demonstrate integrity, openness, and fairness. For example, is the government consistently telling the truth, protecting citizens' rights, and improving lives of all citizens? So those are the really key drivers of trust. But there are some underlying issues, okay, that can affect these drivers of trust. And if we look at them, they are really public perception on governance issues. And let me just highlight a few of them. One is accountability of governments to its citizens for policies, for actions, and for public finances. I think John and Hian already talked a lot about public finances, among other things. A second aspect of governance issue that can also affect trust is openness of government to its citizens about its policies, actions, and finances. And the previous two speakers spoke about that as well. And Mr. King also talked about that in his opening remark. A third governance issue is involvement of citizens in the political process and decision-making, as well as monitoring of public service delivery. A fourth important aspect is government effectiveness. And this is how well a government performs its intended function, including the quality of its public services, the quality of the civil service, and the quality of policy implementation, as well as government's commitment to improving all of this. And lastly, the impact of government's policies on people's well-being. For example, the impact of government's economic policies on citizens' standard of living. The perception of all of this will drive trust one way or the other. Next slide. So we could ask, does trust really matter? Or does it matter that trust in government is low? My response will be yes, it matters a lot. And why? Trust is critical for governments to be legitimate and effective. Trust is really the foundation upon which the legitimacy of public institutions is built. And without trust, governments will find it challenging to maintain social cohesion and development in a country. Trust is also important for the successful implementation of a wide range of public policies that depend on behavioral responses from the public. And you will know that a lot of government policies depend on behavioral responses from the citizens. We see that, for instance, in the COVID vaccine program, where many people refused and are still refusing to take the vaccine in many countries. Also, public trust can facilitate greater regulatory and tax compliance by individuals and corporations. In countries where there is low trust in government, you find poor compliance among citizens and corporations with various regulations and tax policies. In fact, it has been argued that trust is not only an indicator of success, but trust is one of the ingredients that make success possible for a government. Next slide. So in a country, you can either have bad or good governance, and this will lead to high or low trust and can put the country in a vicious or vicious cycle. A vicious cycle can be expected in a country where, due to bad governance, citizens have low trust in government, thereby affecting government's legitimacy and consequently the ability of government to maintain social cohesion and development. Also, with impact on government's ability to implement its policies and to secure compliance with its regulations. And this in turn can lead to further deterioration in governance. So that's what the diagram on the left-hand side is trying to explain or illustrate. Alternatively, we may have a virtuous cycle where good governance in a country results in high trust in government, thereby making the government even more effective and legitimate and leading to even better governance. It should therefore not be surprising that trust is increasingly identified by leaders and analysts as the potentially missing element for better government performance and building a healthy and prosperous society where individuals and corporations can thrive. Next slide. To ensure that a country is on the virtuous cycle path, it must improve governance and accountability to create what we will call public values. But what does that really entail? That is this process of creating public values. A government must appreciate that citizens have certain expectations of their government. And everyone connected from around the world today, you have certain expectations of your government. And this may vary from countries to countries. And governments also have to appreciate that citizens' expectations are somewhat dynamic. They are increasing and they are changing over time. I mean, depending on the generation. The digital generation have various expectations of government and the way they expect those expectations to be met. With that understanding, governance and accountability should aim at creating public values that meet citizens' expectations. And these public values include, I will just identify 5 areas in the interest of time. First, achievement of desired outcomes, such as social, economic, and environmental outcomes. I think in various countries, we have environmental outcomes relating to climate change. We have social outcomes relating to health, education, economic outcomes as to the rate of inflation and various other aspects. Then another important aspect of public value is efficiency. And this includes the agility of the bureaucracy, value for money in government, absence of rent seeking from government officials in the conduct of government business, and so on and so forth. A third aspect of public value is accessible, responsive, and quality public services. We all want that. A fourth aspect is transparency about government policies, actions, spending, and processes. And I think the earlier speakers have touched on transparency, and you hear more about that also as I continue with my presentation. A fifth area of public value that I would like to identify is public processes that allow citizens to contribute to decision making and monitor implementation. Participation is really an important public value that governance and accountability process needs to ensure. Now, we have to understand that governance and accountability really are about getting certain things done or achieved. It is not an end in itself. It is really a means to an end. Therefore, governance and accountability must clearly focus on creating public values. That is outputs and outcomes that are for the common good and which will help government to earn the trust of citizens. And this can be specific to countries. And this may explain why, for instance, you have China up there, Singapore up there, and you have Argentina, South Africa, very rated low in the slide that I presented earlier. Next slide, please. Now, let's look at some aspects of governance and accountability that countries may focus on improving. I want to start by saying that these are just some areas that I'm highlighting. These are not necessarily all the areas that government needs to focus on. And depending on the country where you are coming from, some of these may be relevant. Some of these may already have been addressed by your government. So it may not be something that your country needs to focus on. So first is transparency. And as I said, this is something we'll continue to talk. I will continue to mention in my presentation, and other earlier speakers have spoken about it. But when we talk about transparency, we are talking about a range of things, including, for instance, the enactment and implementation of rights to information laws that give citizens the right to access government information to better hold government accountable. This is fundamental. Right to information. Also, important in the area of transparency is transparency of public finances, including increased transparency for budgeting, financing, budget execution, and reporting. Second area or aspect is government operations and service delivery. And this includes strengthening of systems for government operations to deliver those services and reforms to improve the accessibility and quality of public services, including, for instance, public sector digitization. Also, strengthening of subnational governments' capacity to improve public service delivery and accountability is very important because there are studies that show that the closer the service provider is to those that are receiving the services, the better, and the better that they can also be held accountable. A third aspect of governance and accountability that needs to be improved is citizen engagement or citizens empowerment. Various initiatives to empower citizens and to promote citizens' participation in service delivery, including service delivery decision-making, implementation, and monitoring. A fourth aspect is the rule of law. And in many countries, this is broken. So we are talking about initiatives to improve the independence, accountability, transparency, and efficiency of justice institutions, and also to provide legal empowerment for citizens, resources for citizens to be able to seek redress through the justice system. Fifth aspect is initiatives to fight corruption. Mr. King mentioned corruption. in his opening remark. This is an issue in many countries, and it's an age-long problem. And part of what needs to be done is reforms to eliminate incentives for corruption in the public sector, and also strengthening of various institutions of accountability to deter and detect corruption. And the sixth aspect that I will identify are reforms to strengthen public accountability pillars, including, for instance, enhancing the legal and operational independence of civil society organizations, anti-corruption bodies, the media, supreme audit institutions, and others. Next slide. So, but how can countries improve governance and accountability? To improve governance and accountability, I will say requires a multi-stakeholder approach. And every stakeholder group is important, as each brings important perspectives to the table. We could talk about national stakeholders and international stakeholders. With respect to national stakeholders, we have state actors, including the various arms of government like parliament, the executive, the judiciary. And we also have non-state actors in a country like citizens, NGOs, and the private sector. These national stakeholders can bring pressures for change in various forms. They can also contribute know-how in terms of what needs to be done, and they can also be involved in designing and implementing reforms to improve governance and accountability. I mean, in a number of countries where governance and accountability are being effectively improved, you have the concept of co-creation, where the government works with civil society organizations and other stakeholders to co-create reform and implement and monitor those reforms. There are also international stakeholders like the multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, international financial institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, and regional development banks and other governments. I know you, the participants will have various views about these institutions, but I want you to be aware that there is a lot that these institutions are doing to really support governments to improve the lives of the citizens. You also have other governments as part of these international stakeholders that can contribute. And these international stakeholders can help with convening, and they can bring critical knowledge and financing to the table. Next slide. Let me now illustrate the support that international stakeholders can provide with how the World Bank is supporting countries to strengthen governance and accountability. So, with knowledge, financing, and convening, the World Bank is supporting countries in various aspects of governance. I will just give some examples here. For instance, in the area of transparency, we are supporting countries to improve transparency of public finances, working with various stakeholders. Also improving government operations and service delivery, and strengthening subnational government capacity. We have a range of operations that are focused on improving PFM that Ian talked about earlier on, improving procurement, improving human resource management, and also programs that are focused on really improving capacities of regional and local governments, so that they can better deliver services. Also, initiatives that are focused on civic engagement, initiatives focused on improving respect for the rule of law. We're also supporting governments to tackle the issue of corruption. And we have programs that are focused on strengthening various public accountability pillars. For instance, later on, we'll be talking about supreme audit institutions. We've done a lot on this in various countries. A few years ago, we even started publishing an index on the independence of supreme audit institutions, just to trigger debate about what governments are doing to improve the independence of supreme audit institution, which we think is very critical to their performance. The bank has launched various initiatives to support countries. Some initiatives cover many aspects of governance and are tailored to a country's specific needs. I can't, in the interest of time, I cannot list all of these initiatives that the World Bank has launched to support governance and accountability, but I just want to give one example. And that example is the GovTech initiative that supports public sector digitization and focuses on the following aspects, among other things. The first one is improving government operations. And this is done through digitizing systems for public finance, procurement, human resource management, government workflows, and more. GovTech initiative is also helping government to improve service delivery through taking a citizen-centric approach to digitizing public service delivery to citizens and corporations, including, for instance, social services, licensing, registrations, and more. Another aspect that the GovTech initiative is focusing on is improving transparency of public finances, procurement, service delivery. Because the GovTech help to digitize all of this, then more information also can be easily made available on government websites and through various platforms. Another aspect of GovTech is strengthening citizens' engagement through, for instance, digitizing platforms for crowdsourcing ideas from citizens and also receiving citizens' feedback. And finally, is tackling corruption. For instance, through the use of technology to reduce human intervention in service delivery and also human interactions in various forms, so that when things can be, for instance, to ask for rent or bribe, really, in a lot of cases, require human interaction, physical human interaction. To the extent that you can minimize that, you can also be able to reduce corruption. Last slide. And so, let me conclude my presentation by emphasizing really the importance of supreme audit institutions that we are going to be talking about in the next session in governance and accountability. Good governance requires robust public accountability. The supreme audit institution is a critical link in the public accountability chain. And countries with weak supreme audit institutions will most likely have weak public accountability, considering that the accountability chain will be as strong as its weakest link. So if the supreme audit institution is weak, then you're going to have weak public accountability in the country. So in a sense, strong and effective supreme audit institution, I will conclude, is a core element of good governance and accountability that is focused on public value creation that earns citizens. And that's why, as a bank, we've prioritized supporting the strengthening of supreme audit institutions in our engagement. Thank you. Back to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much. That was a fabulous presentation, and I think everyone has been asking questions about how can they promote this transparency. And I did put in the chat that the Good Governance Academy, in the run-up to this colloquium, has been partnering with an organization called Partnership for Transparency, and we've had 3 of our series of 4 already on civil society's engagement on transparency and how to engage with the public sector in terms of access to information and transparency, to engage and mobilize civil society to get far more involved in this. We have got 5 minutes before we're going to take a 5-minute break. So I would like to ask some questions from the Q&A. I'm going to just ask if our speakers could make themselves available. The one thing, and I think, Ian, this is for you, from Lakshman, can you inform whether there are standards for maintenance of proper accounting records and development of skills of public sector accountants, which is currently very weak?
So thanks for that question. I mean, I think in terms of the actual detail underlying the account, the accounting records and so on, certainly our standards don't go down that deep, but by implication, actually, the international standards, both for reporting, the IPSAS, and also the audit standards that will be used by the international, the supreme audit institutions in doing the audit, do actually build off that record keeping. So that is absolutely the fundamental, and certainly, if the big difference between cash-based reporting and accrual-based reporting is fundamentally understanding and having an asset register, understanding your liabilities, having strong records of those, and not only actual liabilities but contingent liabilities. In terms of the standards in terms of professional education, very much it depends on what's appropriate in terms of the level of skill required. I think there is a perception in terms of a jurisdiction moving to accrual reporting. That means that everybody needs to be a qualified accountant through a professional accountancy organisation that is a member of IFAC, and that comes with membership obligations in terms of not only application of standards, but also ethics and fundamentally a rigorous qualification up front. But that's not necessary for everybody. That certainly needs to be present at appropriate levels in the system, whether that's the standard setting function or whether it's qualified chief financial officers. What is important, I think, is that there are also other appropriate levels of qualification throughout the system. And it may well be that if you look at, say, for example, widespread qualification through accounting technician qualifications can be appropriate for various people. Also, not everybody needs to know the details, so it may well be that there are various international certificates provided through professional accountancy organisations that are appropriate. Also, perhaps more general training, for example, for those that need to actually, that participate in the relevant governance and audit committees. So I think it's important then to think about what level of knowledge is actually required in order to be able to exercise the function. And I've given various examples of the different levels of accreditation, and some of those will be available at national level. Some are provided, through international institutions. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. And that also answers Neil's question in part from Neil from India in terms of the expertise and just growing in terms of fiscal literacy. A quick question to Ian, sorry, not Ian, John. We've got, and I don't know if this is something that you have off the back of your hand, but do you have any examples of countries where there is a good process of budget oversight that does involve citizen bodies? So in terms of that transparency and disclosure, we did have in the chat function an example of Dubai. Somebody said that the Dubai process was very easy to read in terms of the budget. But is there any specific examples that you would like to call out, or perhaps some specific practices?
I mean, in terms of citizen dialogue focused on parliaments, if you take, for example, Sweden, there the budget is introduced at the end of September, beginning of October. And it is essentially the only item on the agenda of Parliament until it is passed in December. The budget committee looks at the aggregates, their impact on the economy, and it focuses on dividing the budget into the various sectors. And then those sectors, for example, the budget for the Ministry of Education, that goes to the Education Committee. And each of the sector budget goes to the different committees, and they hold various hearings where they get the opinions of everyone on it. There will, of course, be representations from the ministries there as well, but it is to get the opinions of everyone. The budgets have some freedom, the committees have some freedom to reallocate money within a certain ceiling that they are set. But I think the overall is that this is a wonderful way to get input from people that may inform choices and the direction of spending going forward.
Thank you. That's very helpful, very useful.
There are many examples out there, but they're all isolated. If they could all be brought together and one country implement all of them, we'd be in a wonderful place.
Yes, thank you very much. We're going to take a 5-minute break, so we're actually 4 minutes now, just to catch a body break, a cup of tea. Thank you very much for that, John. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Ed, for your presentation. We are going to save your questions, Ed, for the end of the after the panel discussion. But in the meantime, I thought it would be interesting. I'm going to launch a poll to see. We always talk about diversity. I don't know if you could see that poll yet. We always talk about diversity, and one of the diversity factors that we're not so on top of is our intergenerational diversity. So quite an interesting question came from one of the attendees today in terms of what intergenerational diversity do we have on the call today? I would love for everyone to be able to participate, to just give us an indication on who is actually watching a colloquium, and then in terms of this very tricky subject, and it'll perhaps also give us an indication of those people who are trying to further educate themselves and to keep on top of the changing conditions. I see a few results coming up now. I will share them with you, but we can have some guesses. Perhaps in the chat function, you can guess which category do you think is the oldest? So is the most representative? Do you think it's in terms of the United States elections? They found that the majority of the winning party's voters were in the 45 to 60-year-old category. It seems to be that those were the people who were most out to vote in yesterday's United States elections. But perhaps on Tuesday's elections, but perhaps we can see what do you think the category is for people online today. So I'm getting a sense now we've got 60%, so 59, over 50s, so low intergenerational diversity, above 50, yes, 59, 50. So it's all the oldies that seem to be online today, trying to keep, I guess, updated and aware of what's going on. You'll be surprised. I'm getting some more votes coming in now. So we're up to 61% voted. There, Lindley is saying 40s. Godfrey saying, oh, okay, so we're pushing the age group down. Do you really think we have that kind of diversity? I think we've got some interns that perhaps are online or certainly new in the public sector. Maybe some students, certainly when you captured your industry information, when you told us, I'll give you some information at the end of the colloquium in terms of what industries we have represented, and there are educators as well as academics, and academics include, of course, university students, postgraduate students, etc. I'm going to end the poll now. You've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, let's end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. So there we go. So not a very big youth representation. Interestingly, the 30 to 39 age group, in fact, 30 to 49 makes up more than 50% of that of the survey. So of the 64% of people attending. So actually a younger, I would say, representative than what we guessed. We guessed in the 50 to 59 age category. So thank you very much, everybody. Late bloomers, Yasmina. Yes, late bloomers. Certainly, I think it's important for us to make the time. Often in today's busy world and busy times, we find at webinars we are almost a luxury. Perhaps we feel like that we're not working. Perhaps we can have the webinar going while we do some other work, but be careful of the quality of that other work that you're doing. But thank you very much for joining us today, because this does seem like a luxury in today's world. Unfortunately, and welcome back to those people who are back, we have finished. So our speakers haven't been able to go for that body break. But welcome back. We did have a survey while you were away on your tea break. Thank you very much for participating in that. I'd like to hand over to our chairman of the Good Governance Academy. And Alan was also the past president of the International Federation of Accountants that Ian mentioned in terms of the, and I gave the links in terms of the access to pathways to accrual and various others papers. So thank you, Alan. Alan is going to introduce our panelists and launch into our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And I think it's fair to say that the 20 to 29-year-olds are extremely busy, either studying or looking for their new jobs or starting their new jobs. And of course, they're going to be the ones that make the world a better place. So I think they're probably better off doing what they're doing today than joining us, although I'm sure if they've got some time, they'll be able to follow this on the recording later on. So first of all, let me start, just by thanking everyone for being here. We started out at about 540 participants, and we've stayed above 660 for the past hour, which is a fantastic participation and attendance. I thank all of you for doing that. And I'll come back, later on when I make my closing remarks. But just say that I first met Sakani 2 years ago in Johannesburg. It was just over 2 years ago in September 2022. And I met Gareth in London about a month ago on the 8th of October, so exactly a month ago. And I have to say that I was really inspired by them as individuals, but also by what they do and the importance of the work that they do. It's not obvious to a lot of people what controllers and auditors and accountants general do, but I think it's very important to have them with us in this conversation, particularly as this is of course our first colloquia focusing on the public sector. So thank you very much. You're busy people under a lot of pressure, and the fact that you could take so much of your time to be with us today is really very, very much appreciated. So thank you. Before we begin our discussion, maybe I could just please ask you just to briefly introduce yourself. So let's start with Sakani.
Thank you very much, Alan, and I want to greet all the participants in this panel. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to the presentations that were given a few minutes ago. I am delighted to be here. My name is Sakani Maluleke, the Auditor General of South Africa, and I have a role that gives me some scope to interact with other AGs in different parts of the world, including my colleague Gareth. So I'm really pleased to be sharing this platform with him. And thank you to the Good Governance Academy for making time and space for a conversation about the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakani. Gareth?
Good morning from London, and thank you, Alan, for the introduction. Thank you to the Good Governance Institute for arranging this very important colloquium this morning, and hello to Sakani. Good to see you too. I've really enjoyed the discussion so far. I'm the Controller and Auditor General of the National Audit Office, which is the audit body for the United Kingdom. So my job is to audit everything that government spends in the UK. So auditing the accounts of every part of government, but also producing reports on how well the money is being spent. So that's our value for money or performance audit work. So those two streams of work keep us very busy. I have around about 900 colleagues in the organisation in the UK, and we audit around about £1.5 trillion worth of spending every year.
Thank you very much, Gareth. So let's just kick off. This is going to be a conversation that we're going to have, the three of us. And of course, no doubt will lead to some questions, which hopefully we'll be able to address later on. So maybe I could just start just to explain, ask you, what do Auditors General do? What are your roles in the UK and in South Africa, and how you hold the public officials and, politicians to the highest standards of accountability? Sakani, may I start with you?
Thank you. So South Africa's Supreme Audit Institution, which is the AG's office, we often refer to it as a SAI, we aim to strengthen our country's democracy. We're an independent institution with a mandate that's derived from our constitution. And we're here to audit all of the public sector. Every single public institution, whether they operate at the local level, the provincial level, or the national level, whether they're a department or a public entity, our job is to audit and report transparently on how they have managed their finances. In the course of our audits, and we audit all of them every single year, in the course of our audits, we look at critical areas, starting with financial information. We give an opinion on the credibility of financial information. And here it's about confirming whether the financial report is prepared in a manner that's consistent with the reporting standards that have been sanctioned by the National Treasury and standards set by an independent accounting standards board. The second area of our annual audits covers service delivery information, performance information. And it's really about giving a sense of whether or not the information that's being prepared and presented around how that institution has delivered on the predetermined performance objectives, whether or not that information is credible. And that's quite important, especially for a public institution, because those predetermined outcomes are informed by the budget allocations that were agreed upon at the beginning of the financial year. The third part of our work looks at compliance, whether or not the rule of law has been observed in the course of deploying public resources, particularly the laws that relate to financial management, and especially the laws relating to procurement, public procurement, whether or not the key priorities on how public procurement ought to be run, whether or not those have been achieved and observed over the course of dealing with financial resources. The other part of our audit deals with us giving a statement on the state of internal controls in every environment where we audit. And that gives a sense of how the capacity or the capability of an institution is being preserved or being built by the people that are entrusted to run that institution. So when we audit in this way, we support those that actually run institutions with information that helps them drive the type of corrections that will, on an ongoing basis, build the institution and improve how they run public affairs. We also, because we publish our audit reports, they form the basis of our briefings and engagements with Parliament, so that every single person that's got responsibilities on financial management, whether they are running a public institution, whether they are responsible for it as a member of the executive, and whether or not they are in the oversight mechanism in Parliament, they benefit from our work because we are able to report to them and engage with them in a way that's independent and informed by credible information. So that's really our contribution on what we've done and what we continue to do with the team that I lead of 3,600 people, because we do have to audit almost 1,000 audit institutions across the country every single year. And through our work, maybe if I can just add, through our work, we aim to give information and insight on how individual institutions are running, but because we can see everyone, we can look across sectors. We can also look across spheres of government. So we have a unique vantage point that gives a view on how the whole of government is operating, so that when we go to the national executive, we can talk to them about where the pitfalls are and how they can improve the quality and efficiency of spend. We can highlight where the risks are in terms of the things that need to attend to if they're going to get the outcomes that they require. And at the end of the day, we can tell citizens how the resources that have been put in the custody of government are being deployed for their benefit or not.
Thank you, Sakani. That's a huge ask, but we'll come back to some of the sort of the challenges, the opportunities, and things later. But Gareth, my turn to you with the same question, please.
Yes, and you maybe not surprising to know that the principles are very similar. So my key stakeholders are the public in the UK, the people who pay their taxes to fund public services and are entitled to transparent reporting on how that money is used, but also Parliament itself. And I have a very important relationship with a committee in Parliament called the Public Accounts Committee, which is a cross-party group of MPs, always chaired by an opposition member of Parliament, which is a really important point for scrutiny. That committee takes our reports and holds public hearings, taking evidence from government officials on the topic that we've covered in detail in our reports. So the combination of the technical audit process, assessing how well public money has been used, combined with the political scrutiny process of a cross-party group of MPs holding the government to account in Parliament, is actually a very powerful combination. And it's taken very seriously by members of Parliament in the UK. They all are strong supporters of the National Audit Office role in the UK. They value its independence and our impartiality, and it's one of the few institutions actually in the United Kingdom that hasn't been challenged on its impartiality or robustness of analysis and so on. And we're never complacent about that. That's something we have to earn with every piece of work we do. But it's one of the parts. I mean, there's plenty of things that need improving in the UK setup, along with lots of other countries. But this is actually one part that is valued and regarded as effective by both politicians and people outside politics interested in how public money is being used. So I think the principles are the same as Sakani outlined. Auditing accounts in the way that an auditor would in any other sector. So reporting to audit committees of government departments, of companies owned and run by government. And so the normal audit relationship there, shedding light on the reliability of the financial statements, reporting on the use of resources in those organisations, but then this very important link with Parliament on top of that. And in the same way as Sakani said, because we look at how money is being used across a whole range of public bodies, we have unrivaled access across education, health, defence, overseas spending, anything that government spend is within our remit. We are then able to draw lessons, and we produce regular lessons learned reports, say, for example, on how digital transformation is being implemented across government. And those are then used by officials in every part of government to assess their own improvement journeys. So one of the things we're very passionate about is that although audit is really about assurance and trust, as previous speakers have said, it is also about improvement. And we are absolutely determined that the results of our work are used as to avoid similar mistakes in the future, to avoid everybody having to reinvent the wheel. So I think that combination of assurance and improvement is a really important feature of our role.
Thank you both. And I started off by saying how inspired I was meeting both of you, and I hope already people can see where that inspiration, why I was inspired by you and what you do. Now, underpinning sort of everything you do and how you do your work, of course, is independence. You both referred to, in fact, Sakani, you use that word yourself. So could you just maybe explain, and I'll start with Gareth this time, how your independence is assured and guaranteed, and also what are the kind of safeguards in place to ensure that what you do and how you do it is absolutely protected, with no undue influence from any part of government or the political sort of setup, etc.
Yeah, no, very happy to. As I say, I think actually the way that this has evolved in the UK has led to a very strong independent organisation. I mean, just to give you some of the features of that. First of all, clear legal basis for my role. So my responsibilities are set out in law very clearly, as is the supporting role that the National Audit Office plays in helping me meet those responsibilities. And that makes it very clear that I'm required to, first of all, decide on what needs auditing independently of government, that I and the National Audit Office exist outside government, and we're funded directly by Parliament. So the UK government has no control over the funding of the National Audit Office. That's an absolutely crucial element of independence that clearly I have to show that I'm using all of those resources responsibly, and we take that very seriously. But Parliament is very interested in how we're doing that, but it regards it as a really important bit of our independence, that it's Parliament that sets our budget, not the government of the day. Other controls on independence, I think, first of all, my appointment is bipartisan. So I and my predecessors were proposed for this role by the chair of the Public Accounts Committee and the Prime Minister, and because the chair of the Public Accounts Committee is always in opposition, it's a bipartisan recommendation across the parties. Very important element in kind of confidence and in independence. And I have a fixed term of office of 10 years, which is non-renewable. And again, so it's a long term of office, which means that civil servants can't just wait for me to leave. They have to realise I'm going to be there, keeping an eye on what they're doing for a long time. But also, non-renewable is important, because I'm not having to make myself popular with anybody, so that I get reappointed. And again, I can just get on with my job, report what needs to be reported, and not be concerned whether anybody likes it. And I think that's another crucial element of how the independence works. And of course, overlaying all of that is our professional conduct.
Professionalism.
People will, whatever the constitutional setup, people will make their own judgment about, is this person behaving in an independent and impartial way? Can we trust their judgments? Is there any evidence of bias or ducking difficult issues? And so you have to prove this day by day in the way that we do our work.
Thank you, Gareth. And in fact, somebody online is asking Sakani, which of course I was coming to next, is how does the Auditor General South Africa compare to the UK independence measures? So Sakani, maybe you could describe how it works in South Africa. And by the way, the importance of this is really to share what's going on around the world. And hopefully, as John sort of said earlier, if we can all get to the same high standard, the world be in a better place. I see you've been referred to as Lady Sakani by some people, Sakani, so maybe we need to get you into the UK New Year's Honours list so you can actually have the formal title of Lady but from the King. But over to you.
I think I best maintain my relationship with Gareth, because I too have a fixed term. I have 7 years, also just long enough. It's also non-renewable. I'm appointed through a similar process as what Gareth would have described. Here, there's also a multi-party committee of Parliament that runs this process. They advertise, they shortlist, they interview, and it's all done in the full glare of the public. And at the time that I'm now appointed, it is indeed for a tenure that's known, it's fixed, and it's clear. The Constitution provides for very clear imperatives around security of tenure. So there are specific grounds on which I could be dismissed, but I can't be dismissed simply for doing my work, which is really important, right? It allows me the space to do what I'm supposed to do without fear, without favor, and without prejudice. And indeed, my impartiality is then guaranteed. I also, like anybody else, would have to keep earning that independence, right? South Africa has this constitutional and legal framework and practice that guarantees independence. So much so that the World Bank has rated South Africa as one of 2 countries that enjoys full independence based on their criteria that is internationally recognized. It's the same rating that Ed referred to in his presentation earlier on. Our job as South Africa is to ensure that we continue to earn this independence by operating in a way that's ethical, where we deliver quality work that's credible, but also ensuring that we deliver relevant work. And for us, that's important. It's crucial that we keep challenging ourselves as South Africa to be responsive to the moment, to understand what's required for us in any particular environment, and really stretch our mandate so that we do add value into the accountability ecosystem. We give full expression to the promise that comes with an independent and effective supreme audit institutions. One of the things that really stands us in good stead is that we're able to raise our funding through our audit fees. So we charge audit fees to everyone that we audit, and then we collect. That gives us a level of independence that certainly allows us to plan our affairs properly and in the long term. Of course, like anyone else, we'll also have to demonstrate that we're using those monies in a way that's responsible. And we're also subjected to scrutiny. So we do the same things we expect of everyone else. Our own governance arrangements have to be top-notch. Our own, the audit process that we're subjected to has to be the same as what we expect of other people. We table our annual report and audit report in Parliament, and I engage with Parliament directly on who conducts oversight on how I'm running the office, so that at least there is that level of accountability and transparency as well. But I wanted to say that another good pillar is that we're able to hire our own staff. That's an area that sometimes gets neglected. The idea that a supreme audit institution can actually run its own affairs in building the capability that they need to run the institution. So hire their own people, have their own human resource management practices, make sure that they have the type of capability that can help them execute with excellence. Yeah.
Thanks, Akani. So Gareth, you're now Sir Gareth. I don't know if you saw that popping up on the screen. That will come in time. I'm absolutely certain of that. Thanks, Sakani, and that segues nicely into talking about sort of talent, resources, etc. But before I get there, can I just check? And obviously, as public officials, discretion is critical. So please, I don't want to put you on the spot, but have you, in the time you've been in your jobs, somebody says, Sir Alan sounds nice also. Oh my goodness, this is, I don't think there's enough space in the honours list to recognize that. But have you sort of come across or heard of in the past of any sort of undue pressure being put on these roles? And if so, how has that been sort of mitigated to prevent it having the undesired effect that it would naturally have? So, Kani, should I stay with you?
Sure, I'm happy to volunteer a response. We've seen that in different parts of the world, and not just concentrated in one continent. There are sometimes inappropriate pressures put on Auditors General. And that's why we have to continue to advocate for the independence of Supreme Audit Institution and the protection of the gains that have been made. So sometimes even when the law provides for independence, politicians then get in the way of an Auditor General doing their work. Once they issue an audit report that's undesirable, they'll get suspended on spurious grounds. They'll get dismissed. They'll be put on leave so they can't complete their work, and the office will be destabilized. I believe that we've got to continue to educate politicians and citizens about the importance and value of supreme audit institutions that are independent, and the importance of maintaining, as I say, the gains we've made. It's quite sad for me to see how in some jurisdictions there's been a reversal on the gains that were made 20, 30 years ago in establishing supreme audit institutions of real independence.
Thanks. Gareth?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to that. I mean, the kind of practical response that, because we're clearly all independent institutions in our own countries, we do actually work together and collaborate internationally through a body called InterSci, which is an association of audit offices across the world, and there are regional subsets of InterSci as well. And the InterSci has developed an approach to support Auditor Generals in countries where they're under the sort of attack that Sakani mentioned. And there have been examples where that's been a very useful buffer against threats to the independence Sometimes it comes too late to actually prevent somebody being dismissed or have their independence interfered with. Other times it has actually rescued the situation in that country. So it's not always possible for clearly outsiders to help resolve a situation in the country, but it's really important to know that there is an organisation that has supporting auditor independence as one of its objectives internationally.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. You talk independence, and there is a question here that and I think it's relating to what you said, Sekani, in South Africa, that if you sort of charge audit fees, are these negotiable, and does this create a risk of a conflict of interest?
You know, what we do, so no one can fire the AG as the auditor. Yeah, we can negotiate audit fees, and I think it's important that we is moderated somewhat. We set a fee, so the AG sets a fee after consultation with Parliament, based on the hours that we think we will spend, but also importantly based on the staff that we're going to deploy to those audits. At the point of audit, at the 1,000 audit points, there's an audit committee that is then the basis on which there's the platform where my team members must make sure that they are accountable for the hours that they are using, and therefore the fee that they are charging for that audit. So I think those governance arrangements do mitigate the risk that's being flagged here. The AG does determine those fees in terms of what the rates will be, but indeed the hours the audit teams are then accountable for. No one can push us out. We have to do the work we must do, but I think it does provide some accountability at the audit base when the accounting officer or the Director General, the person that's being audited, has some view as to what makes up the audit fee, and is able to have a conversation around how they can drive better efficiency going forward. That has stood us in very good state. I hope that answer is helpful.
Good. Gareth, can I just, before we do talk about one of the most important areas, which is, of course, resources and talent, I had the opportunity, as I think I mentioned to you when I saw you a month ago, I was on the board of the UK's Department of International Development, and I actually chaired its Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. So I had the opportunity of engaging with the NAO. And I must say, I felt at the time, and still do, that having independent members on the boards of government departments acts, and particularly with the Audit and Risk Assurance Committees chaired by an independent non-executive director of a government department, added to that sort of safeguard and protection to guarantee your independence. It'd be interesting, Gareth, how do you see the role of these sort of departmental boards, particularly the independent members, and do you feel that is very helpful to you and your people in what they do?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think clearly we're in the same position as Sekani in South Africa, that we can't be fired as the auditor of the department or the public body. So we don't need that kind of protection. But actually, I mean, what really matters, of course, is the board or audit committee engaging properly with our findings? Is it taking the necessary action and holding management to account in the way you would expect in any organisation, in any sector? Yeah. It is more complicated, I think, for government departments, speaking just for the UK here, because clearly they are politically led organisations. It's a minister, an elected politician who takes the decisions in the end on policy and therefore on spending priorities and so on. So the role of the board in those organisations is advisory to the politicians, which is a bit different to a corporate structure, of course. But even so, it's done well, and particularly I think it really works most effectively where the politicians understand the value that a good board can add to their processes, take them seriously and listen to their advice. And where all that's in place, then I think the model works really well. To be honest, I don't think it's consistently effective across government at any one time, just because of the different personalities involved. And And it is dependent on that relationship between the board and the elected politicians working well. But where it does, it does add a lot of value.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to know whether that is a model that should be in place across the world. But let's come on to one of my favorite topics, because we can talk about how we do our jobs and the independence we have, and the fact that we can't be sort of removed from office. And I was a chief auditor of a large multinational company for a number of years, so I understand the role and what you do, and very similar challenges and opportunities in the private sector too. But I'd like to sort of pivot to sort of talking about people. How are you able to attract and retain top talent in your organizations, and what are the challenges to that? So Kani, would you like to go first, because you talked about recruitment and having your own HR sort of processes and HR support team. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about how you go about that and how that's working.
Yeah, no, thank you. So we've been given the independence to resource the office as we deem fit, and that's been a practice in the office for many generations of Auditors General. So what that has helped us do is ensure that we position ourselves as in the market as an employer of choice, as an employer where that's a destination for talented people to come and build their careers. We've also partnered with the PAO in South Africa, the premier one, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, to build capability for the office. So we have a graduate training program that is accredited by SAICA. It's similar to what exists in the big four firms, international firms. And we make sure that through the audit experience, these young graduates who join our office having completed their academic studies as sanctioned and accredited by SAICA. They join our workforce and they form part of a regimented training program over 3 years. And in those 3 years, they are supported in terms of getting their specified work experience through doing the audits we conduct, and also are supported in preparing for and passing the board exams that are set by SAICA, so they're qualifying exams. And at the end of the year, at the end of the 3-year period, they can then qualify as chartered accountants. Many of them stay. We currently have, out of the 3,600 people that work in the office, over 1,000 of them are fully qualified chartered accountants, members of what is globally a well-recognized brand for accountants and auditors. Which then tells you that we have an ability to retain them, right? And then many of them also leave. Over time, we've trained over 2,000 young people and they've been able to then go and do other things. They serve in the public sector, so we build capability for the public sector. They are the CFOs and the HODs in the public sector, the heads of internal audit right across different spheres in the public sector. Others go into the private sector. More and more, the private sector recruits from us because our teams, our guys write and pass the same board exam that others do. So the quality of the training we offer is now understood to be on par with anybody else in the market. And then others go abroad. So many of my Auditors General recruit actively from us, present company included. And as a result, when young people want to go and explore different parts of the world, they have a designation and a qualification that really does stand them in good stead. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to do, because it's about positioning
enhances the brand
nation for talent. And as I say, as a premier employer. And so the things we've been doing, and I think it's to highlight that it's been a journey. The things we've been doing are about partnering with the PAO, about making sure that we hold ourselves to the highest standards and compare ourselves to the best in the market. At the moment, the AG of South Africa, the institution I lead, trains the same number of CAs every year as what a Deloitte or PwC would do. So we really are a top-tier employer and training ground for CAs. And as I say, they go on to do amazing things elsewhere. The other thing that we do is make sure that we invest in diversity of other experts within the audit office. And it allows for a richness of the work that we do. It also allows for us to take on more complex work, which again enriches the experience of the people that we're training. So we are able to do work, as I say, across the 3 spheres of government. We've got experts in education. When we deal with education sector, we have experts that do that work with us. Healthcare, we have experts. Engineers, we have those experts. And it allows us to deliver better quality work, but also enriches the offer. We also do international work. More and more in that domain, and again, it gives fantastic opportunities for our teams. So those are the things we've been able to do over time to attract and to retain talent, and to be decisive and pedantic about continuing to improve the experience of the people that choose to train and to work within the audit office.
Right, thanks. I'm sitting in Paris because we've got the IFAC Council meeting this week, and Gareth in London, it probably is as grey and dreary there as it is here. Now, Sakani, you're in Joburg or Pretoria, lovely weather, excellent lifestyle, etc. You should be sort of encouraging Gareth's people to come and join you, and reverse the one-way traffic which might otherwise be happening. You've got a lot to offer, and I hope that a lot of people who are listening to what you're saying will sort of consider sort of wanting to join the AGSA down there. If I were in the right age group, I might be sort of sending in my application too, but unfortunately that's not going to be the case. Gareth, same question to you. And I know you and I talked a little bit about that when we had our sort of coffee chat in London a month ago, but would you like to sort of add to that, particularly, and I asked the question, coming from the private sector, where I do believe that one of the challenges we face as a profession is attracting top talent into the profession, and of course naturally that then follows the retention of those, but of course we know that to forget retention, if you can't attract them, you won't need to worry about retention. So maybe you could sort of talk to us about that, how it works. What are the lessons that you've learned, that you've seen, and what advice would you give other sort of AIs, sort of SAI members in this respect?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first, just to reassure everybody, we haven't imported huge numbers of secondment staff. We are actually developing a mutual secondment program between the 2 organisations, which will give people moving in both directions really good and useful experience. So we're very keen to keep building those links. And as Sakani said, the opportunity to work internationally is one of the attractors for people to our organisations.
Right.
We audit international organisations as well as UK-based organisations, and we have exchange programmes with other audit institutions around the world. So it's a big part of what we can offer. Just the same as Sakani, we have a big chartered accountant training programme. This year, just over 100 new students joined us to start that 3-year training program. They become chartered accountants, and as Sakani said, it's a very portable qualification, equips you to work in any sector, and we obviously try to retain as many as possible of those as they qualify, but we're also a feeder to the rest of the public sector of that kind of trained talent, which is actually a good byproduct of our role as a big training institution. How do we maintain the attractiveness of our offer to students who obviously have a wide choice? First of all, you have to make them interested in audit, and that is a bit of a challenge, as you were just saying. The big firms in the UK are finding it harder than they used to attract top talent to their training programs. Lots of reasons for that. A perception that audit has become a bit more challenging as a professional process, tougher regulation. They've seen firms being criticised for failed audits and by the regulators and so on. So there's a bit of a kind of tone of this is a profession that's had a tough time, and that has been challenging, I think, for their recruitment. We're somewhat insulated from that at the NAO because we are seen as different to the big firms. They obviously have to distinguish themselves from each other when they're trying to recruit students. We don't have to do that. We are clearly unique in the UK context, and we can say, look, there's nowhere else you can get this qualification and also get this breadth of experience and access. So, during your training contract, you may be working on, going to see defence sites around the UK. You may be going to schools and hospitals. You may be going to see how pensions are paid to elderly people. Whatever your range of interests and so on, there's a good chance that we're going to be able to offer you work that gives you direct access to the things which you would never get access to if you were joining one of the firms. And so there's that. And the other unique bit of our offer is the chance to make a practical difference to society, because, as I said right at the start of this discussion, we see our role as providing assurance, but also supporting improvement of public services and improvement of value for money. And so we don't have to come up with a cleverly concocted mission that excites young people. We absolutely have that, and it doesn't need to be invented. And no one else has quite the same offer. And so that kind of getting people excited about the difference they can make in their professional life here is a big part of how we recruit our students. Obviously, we have to live up to that in the work that we offer them. If that was the pitch, but actually the work was dull and made no difference to anything, then it wouldn't survive long. But it is true, that's what our work does, and we do give our students access to that kind of experience. So they are able to feel, actually, that was a hard week, but that week's work made a difference to
impact
people who rely on public services, and that's a really important element of our offer. So putting all that together has meant we have been able to attract good people.
Right.
We've never fallen short on our quota of recruitment each year of people who meet our quality standard. And in the UK context, we've also worked really hard on the diversity of our intake as well. So we are now, our body of trainees represents the UK, in all sorts of characteristics, which is a big change over the last 5 years, and is making us a stronger institution as a result as well.
Thank you both very much. I know the conversation is, of course, focused on audit and the independent assurance you provide. But of course, we shouldn't forget that within the public sector, there are thousands and thousands of qualified accountants, or hopefully soon to be qualified accountants, that actually run the accounting services, performance management, sort of performance targeting indicators, etc. And I would imagine that people who come into your organizations will also benefit from going back, and I think you mentioned this, Sakani, going back as professional accountants in the public sector, so critical business partners to help public officials and civil servants and indeed ministers make the right decisions with fact-based information, real time, with an eye on impact and outcomes, which I think very much then ties in what you said, Gareth, in terms of the attractiveness of working in the public sector is, you can, really feel that you can have an impact and affect outcomes, and hopefully outcomes for the better. Do you find that in both of your organizations, some of your sort of talent is going back and working as professional accountants in government departments?
Maybe I'll go first. Yes, we are finding that, and in different parts of government. So they're going to the state-owned entities, they're going to the center of government. The Accountant General of South Africa is an alumni of AGSA. Some of them are HODs or permanent secretaries in different departments. One of the things that I find most inspirational is the idea that we get to train young people on ethical principles, which we hope will stand them in good stead when they enter into environments that might otherwise not prioritize that. And they can therefore stand their ground and still do good. And they can also translate that in terms of shifting the culture that sometimes prevails in far too many public institutions. And the part about making an impact, I mean, it's something that we invest a great amount of time engaging on and ensuring that our teams can see the impact of their work. so that wherever they go, they are seized with this understanding that beyond being an accountant that worries about debits and credits, you can have a major impact on outcomes, and you should strive to do so. So it remains our hope that the values and the posture that we get them to adopt here will, as I say, stand them in good stead where they go.
Good. Gareth, anything to add on that?
Very similar. I mean, we aim to retain about 80% of the people on qualification working for the NAO, because obviously we need them to move up our structures and take charge of audits and so on. But that does mean 20% on average would leave after qualifying, some to the public sector, as Sakani has just described, but some to the private and voluntary sectors in the UK as well. And the great thing about that qualification is it's completely portable.
It's portable.
Other sectors. But we often find ourselves meeting people who trained at the NAO, and that in just the same way as Sakani described, it means that we know how they've been trained, we know what their value set is, and it makes this business of improving efficiency in government, that much easier, because we've got a kind of shared basis of understanding.
Yes.
So it's very common to meet NAO alumni in public and private sector roles.
Yeah. And of course, they become great ambassadors for what you do, and hopefully sort of ensure that people really understand the excitement of actually working in the public sector. I mean, I can relate it to my few years on the DFID board. I mean, what attracted me to joining the board as an independent director was really because of the work they did around the world, the impact it had, the outcomes they achieved, and making the lives better for people around the world. I mean, that's something that we could all sign up to. I hope. That's what. Otherwise, what are we doing? Why are we here? So, I mean, one of the reasons why Mervyn and I wanted to sort of put a spotlight on the public sector was to demonstrate how exciting a career in the public sector is and should be. And on that, I was in India sort of a few years ago when I was president of IFAC, and I always, whenever I visited, in fact, that's why I met Sakani, is whenever I visited in that role, I always met the Auditor General and the Accountant General. In some cases, they were one and the same, because I really wanted to ensure that we as a profession understood the importance of the public sector and the values that it has, and to make sure that they're not the forgotten second citizen of the profession. In fact, in many cases, they are larger. The public sector accounting profession is larger than the private sector accounting sector. And I had some very interesting discussions, particularly with the Indian Auditor General, who has, I can't remember the number he had, but he had lots and lots of people working for him. And we talked really about the quality and the professionalism that they had within that organization, and that kind of struck me. And I think I remember, when I went back, I even think I mentioned to Ian sort of this visit I had, which was a sort of an eye opener for me as to the value of what you do and the impact it has. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. Let's now just turn to trust and transparency, and of course we've heard from John, from Ian, and from Ed, and all of them in their own way talked about sort of trust and transparency as a critical bedrock for successful societies. So my question to you would be, what more should public officials and politicians be doing to enhance trust and transparency and encourage greater participation of citizens in the democratic process? John talked a lot about sort of participation, and Ed mentioned that too. And that sort of, I like Ed's chart at the end, which showed the circularity. If you get them right, what advice would you sort of give politicians and public officials to enhance public trust and transparency, and also the citizens then to play their part in participating in the democratic process? Gareth, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, I think obviously our whole reason for existing as organizations is to essentially give people good independent information on whether they can trust government's accounts, whether they can trust what they're being told about how the money is being spent. But I think there's a kind of bigger question here as well, which is, I mean, I was so struck by the charts earlier on that showed actually Sakani and I are to blame for very low levels of trust in our respective governments. And they were down at 30%, I think, on that chart. But this is just why this is such an interesting concept, because I think we're amongst the more challenging and independent audit offices. So what we're essentially doing is shedding light on where things haven't gone well. We are kind of fair and balanced in our reporting, but we give the picture warts and all, I think, to taxpayers and voters in our countries. And if the price of that is that the trust score comes down, that's a really interesting debate about actually are people just better informed about how the money is being used rather than lacking trust per se. So that's a very interesting question. And I mean, I think what's also very striking to us, I think, is the problems facing our governments are getting more and more difficult actually over time, and the problems are more and more common country to country, even in very different economic and historical situations. So climate change is an issue for every single part of the world. All of our governments have got this huge task on how do we maintain economic growth in our countries, but decarbonize our economies, because if we don't, we know what that means for the world in the future and all of our countries in the future. What about this aging population? Combined in some countries, including mine, with very low birth rate. So kind of huge questions about financial sustainability of our governments in the future. So these massive questions are now pressing on elected politicians around the world. And in democracies, I think people are finding it very challenging to be honest with their citizens about this. And we can play an important role in helping governments surface these problems they're now facing. Essentially, the need for investment vastly outstripping the available resources, big prioritization challenges for politicians, which is their job as elected politicians to prioritize. But that's becoming, I think that's becoming a more and more difficult job. And we can really help, I think, by surfacing these challenges and not pretending this is all very straightforward and you know, everybody should expect these problems to be fixed in a simple way. I think these are fundamental challenges to our societies, actually, and by independently shedding light on all of these big spending and investment challenges facing governments, I think we can really help them try and be more honest with their election. It's so, I mean, one of the reasons I'm not a politician is that I don't envy them that task. It's very hard to get elected whilst being honest about the challenges facing the country. And so, but we're going to really struggle if people are not straightforward about what's required and how difficult that's going to be to achieve. So I think we can help because we don't have to stand for election. We can publish honest reports, take the blame sometimes for passing on a difficult message where that's necessary. But I think the challenge then is for the elected politicians to use that work to illustrate what they're trying to achieve and what some of the trade-offs will be for people in that country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to remember that phrase. It's very hard to be elected if you're not honest. Sakani.
I would agree with Gareth on a number of the aspects he shared. My principal advice to politicians would be that it's important to be transparent about the priorities you are choosing. And it's not always palatable, but it's much better when you are frank and transparent about the priorities you are making, and then to actually deliver on the things you do promise. So don't overpromise and then be opaque about what it is you've done and what it is you haven't done. Let's be transparent about what's being chosen, what the trade-offs are, and then let's be effective in implementing the things that we have chosen. And I believe that the Office of the AG, certainly in South Africa, we're focusing a lot more around the governance imperative of transparency, especially on delivery. So in many instances, the debits and credits are coming right. What's got to now be dealt with is the stuff about reporting faithfully on what were the priorities and how they're actually being delivered on. And let's not fudge it, and use the insight to then take the necessary corrective action. You know, sometimes the gap between delivery and not is quite small. I'll give you a very quick example. In the course of our work, we've been given powers which require that we follow up on the implementation of our recommendations. And if that doesn't happen, then we can keep taking the matter forward, right up to reporting it to law enforcement if necessary. And so what we now do is we actually go to specific infrastructure assets and inspect whether or not they're being used or used in the way that they should be. In a couple of instances, and at least there's been at least one over the last 3 years, we found healthcare facilities that have been invested in, but for some reason are not being commissioned or being brought into use. So we now follow it up. So the debits and credits are fine, but then now we can follow it up and keep asking the question about why is this ward not being used? But you know, the equipment is there, money has been spent, and the public that should be benefiting from it can see this investment. They've been promised this investment, but they're not getting the benefit of it. Through our inquiry, we've been able to get the permanent secretaries of different departments to actually now staff those wards or make sure that they are being used, the infrastructure is being used, so we can drive impact. And it's quick actions that can be taken to close the trust deficit that does build when citizens can see an investment that was promised, it's in the ground, but now they don't see the benefit. And why? Because somebody's not making the right choice to bring it into proper commission and actually use it. So sometimes the gaps between where government is and where citizens are can be closed with those corrective actions. And I believe that the work we do as AG's offices can start to close those gaps and really bring into practical reality and practical impact these aspects that we talk about in terms of key governance controls and disciplines that allow for proper performance.
Yeah, thank you, Sekani. I like the point you make about the transparency of the priorities that governments decide on. You know, that's always very difficult, but also, I guess, transparency of how you've reached those priorities, how you've decided, what have you decided not to do, which of course a lot of the public will want you to do, but there is a finite capacity, both in terms of resources, both financial and non-financial resources, and the ability to get things done. I've lived out of the UK now for many years, but I did follow the recent sort of electoral sort of cycle in the UK, and that's one of the difficult things, is to be very clear about why you're making those choices. And of course, it comes up in the budgetary sort of considerations about what you need to do and what you cannot do and what you will not do in the time frame, etc. Very difficult, but you mustn't shy away from that, because I guess that is also what creates this sort of lack of trust in sort of politicians, where you don't do what you do, or you avoid sort of stating clearly what must be done in terms of prioritization, and then be held accountable for doing that. Of course, if you prioritize nothing, you can't be held accountable for what you should be doing. So yeah, and I talk about the UK, but I don't want to be specific about the UK, because I'm sure all governments around the world struggle. And as you say, Gareth, if you want to get elected, you sometimes have to not be completely transparent, because getting elected often is as important. But I see that I see that changing quite well across the world. So thank you very much. I'm just conscious. Let me see. I'm in the background liaising with Carolyn to sort of see how much time we have. So she's given me some clear guidance on that. So maybe just one of the opportunities we have of getting to brilliant Auditors General together is to be able to not only talk about what they do, but also learn and share. What advice would you give to your colleagues across the world to help enhance governance and accountability in the public sector? Gareth?
Yeah, it's obviously we're always kind of a bit hesitant about this because of the context is so different. So even though we have the same job, I'm always conscious that I benefit from a strong history and institutional framework that many of my colleagues internationally don't have at this stage, and so I'm always kind of very cautious about giving what might sound like glib in that situation. So, but I mean, I think this is also based on observing colleagues in very different kind of contexts working. I mean, I think the establishing your credibility and trust with what will be a contentious political environment by really well evidenced reports, being able to stand by your findings when challenged, and demonstrably being fair in your reporting, because I think sometimes independence is a massive asset for our organizations. It's also a big responsibility. So we have to be very careful of how we discharge that responsibility. Any sense that we were abusing our privileged access, and the fact that people can't stop us reporting and so on. So I think just prioritizing quality of analysis, quality of audit evidence, and fairness of reporting, and then over time that builds up your credibility as an organization, I think, and makes it easier for people to accept difficult messages from you, because they're pretty sure that that's come from the evidence rather than because you have some other agenda. And that's a fundamental, the fundamental importance of professional quality, which, being a kind of largely based on accounting and auditing standards really helps, because there's a professional framework there that makes it a natural quality of our organizations. But it has to be, we have to work on it hard. Certainly in the UK, this quality is a continuous challenge for us, and we work, because it's not just about reaching a standard and staying still. It's about continuous improvement, using new technology to improve the insights that we're able to achieve. For example, data analytics in our audit work is a very rapidly growing area, and demonstrating the benefits of that focus on quality to the people who are using our report, so that they are confident that they can trust our analysis and use our findings. I think that's probably the most fundamental point.
Thanks, Sekani. Briefly, back to you.
I would agree with all that Gareth has said. Continue to invest in the relevance of the work you do. Engage with stakeholders professionally, and consistently, with as broad a range of stakeholders, even right up to civil society. It's absolutely imperative that citizens in your country understand the relevance and the importance of the audit office and what you do. And maybe one last thing: independence, we know, is not an end in itself. It's crucial that we be relevant, but also that we earn our independence by also demonstrating that we can lead by example as credible, capable, ethical, well-governed institutions as well.
Thank you so much. A great point to end on. So I'm conscious of time, so again, thank you, Sekani. It's great to see you this time virtually, but I do recall our excellent conversation in Johannesburg a few years ago. Gareth, thank you so much. And I can very much relate to what the NAO has been doing in the UK, given my own sort of association with DFID. I'd like to thank you both for what you do. You serve the public with distinction. You make a difference. You are part of making this world a better place. And I'd like to thank you, and of course, all the people, the 3,600 and the 960 in the UK that proudly go to work and do what they do. Thank you. Carolyn, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you to Gareth and Sekani. It has really been lovely, and isn't it amazing? Thank you, everyone. How the public and people online really appreciate the role of the AG, and I think about the poor chief audit executives in the private sector who are almost vilified as being the policemen, where civil society and the public I just love the fact that we've got Auditor Generals that are standing up for good governance and good practice and transparency, etc., in the public sector. So just the difference between the private and the public sector is lovely. I did ask everyone online to please upvote your questions, and I'll be asking the top questions. We've got almost 50 questions that and answered. So I'll ask, and I've also got some online from the YouTube channel. So the first one, I'm actually going to start with Julia's, because Julia's was up there, and it's to the two of you. And while I'm asking you these questions, can I please ask the other speakers that are online? I see Alan's dropped off. So if you could all please put your cameras.
Just to get some water. I'm coming back.
Okay. So John, Ed, Ian, Prof. King, if you could put your cameras on again. I know I did turn them off. So please put your cameras on again and turn your mics on. I'm going to ask, while you do that, I'm going to ask the question from Julia. The Auditor General's reports articulate mostly same issues every year, i.e. repeat findings at all levels of government. And I haven't been on many audit committees myself. That is it's prevalent throughout. It's almost like, says Julia, that there's no appetite for government to implement the AG's recommendations. This questions on the basis of the South African context. But as Auditor Generals, how do you feel about this, and how does this impact on your motivation to keep going? So, Tsakani, because Julia says this is a South African context, I'll ask you first, and then I'll go to Gareth. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we do is we keep finding ways to raise the issue differently. And part of it is linking the audit finding to reality and the things that particular accounting officer or the audit committee or the minister or parliament are concerned about. It's useful to say, please reconcile your suspense account regularly. But if you can link it to real impact around service delivery or loss of financial resources, then suddenly the conversation changes. So we're finding that we're able to create the appetite amongst critical people who need to worry about the stuff to make sure that they do attend to it. We don't get frustrated. Fortunately, we have to be there every single year, do a good job every single year. Our role is to find ways to create an appetite amongst different stakeholders to take action. Thanks.
And there is a holiday at the end of 7 years, apparently. So, Connie. And Gareth, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we one of the reasons why we do so many of our lessons learned reports is to try to avoid everybody having to make the same mistake repeatedly. Clearly, you can the English phrase is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So we can produce these reports, but people do actually have to find them useful. So we treat that as a bit of a challenge to ourselves, actually, rather than just keep doing it the same way. Can we innovate our own approach to maybe engage with people in a different way? We're starting to use videos on YouTube, for example, when we're talking about our report findings. We're offering webinars like versions of today's session, where we bring experts on a topic together and reflect on our findings and try and get practitioners to engage with those findings so that they can learn from them. So I think we should always challenge ourselves to say it's no good complaining that people are not responding to our findings. We have to keep on finding better ways of accessing people, people with different learning styles, people with different time pressures. How do we produce our work in a way that's engaging for them? So I think that's one. And the final point on it, I think we just have to accept that this is an endless task as well. We have turnover in key roles in public services. New people will arrive who weren't around when the big lessons were being learned, and you can't assume they'll just absorb those things by magic. So I think we just have to accept that part of our job is to repeat ourselves and to find ways of briefing people who are new to role and sharing lessons. Because I think sometimes we assume that because we've done a good job of landing the messages of a report, then that will improve the area. I think realistically, you have to keep putting energy into these systems to make sure that the learning isn't lost.
Can I just say, Gareth, you said endless, but not thankless.
Good. Thank you, Alan. I've got a question from online to Ed, actually, from the World Bank perspective, that says, how do you navigate the turnover of every Auditor General when a new Auditor General comes in, given that if a country has got World Bank loans?
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, before I respond to your question, I have something to add to what Gareth and Saskana said. And that is the public, the citizens, they also have a role to play in getting governments to respond or take actions on the Auditor General's report. Okay, so they have access to this report, they see it. So if government is not responding, I think there should be pressure on the government to respond to take actions on those issues that are being raised in the Auditor General's report. So we shouldn't leave all of this to Auditors General alone. Now, to the question you are asking, this is a challenge. Of course, we would like a situation where you have continuity of Auditor General in place, but then we recognize that constitutionally, depending on the jurisdiction, there are those with lifetime. There are those that have specific time. Then there are those who stay there until the time that they retire. Okay, so we respect that. But you know, you have the Auditor General, so that's the leader, the head, but there are others below the Auditor General. They don't change frequently. So you still have that continuity of the auditors and the work that they do. And from the World Bank perspective, we actually prefer to use the Auditors General to audit the loans and credits that we give to our countries.
Can you expand on why you like using the AGs in country?
So we believe that they are more independent. And why do I say they are more independent? They are not appointed by the project coordinating unit. They are not appointed by this line ministry that is implementing the project. They are appointed based on the constitution by the president, and they are there. They cannot be removed because they issue a negative report on a particular project. They cannot be removed because of that. So they seem to be more independent. So we then go in a way to support their capacity with different instruments. But we think when you take a look at the report, you can actually go to our website and look at the reports of auditors on projects. You will find that the reports of the Auditor General, they are more candid on the use of bank assisted finances. So we prefer to use them because they are more independent.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got one that's also come from online, but Ian, I'm going to direct it to you. And I know that it's not to do with standards, etc., but it's the role of the AG in the context of the changing political environment and the influence of that changing political environment that changes every 4 years or so, and the impact on the AGs and the ability for the AGs, just in terms of accountability in the government. And you're on mute, just to remind you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, inevitably, whenever you get a change in government, or even when you get a change in minister, actually, that's a pressure on the civil servants, the department, and so on. And I think one of the challenges, that perhaps creates some instability in government that maybe that isn't there in private sector organizations. But I think that's where actually having the continuity, in terms of the accountability framework, in terms of which goes throughout in terms of the way the budgets are allocated, in terms of the way that the accountability works to the legislature, the reporting standards, that's really important. But then I think as well, that framework that's provided by the Auditor General is absolutely crucial, and people know that is going to be there. They know that there is going to be an audit report. They know that there may well be frequent studies of either within or across government about how money is being spent, where the target. I think that stability of the overall framework is really important. And it probably does go back to the general thinking about trust, because actually if you see that there is a clear framework that works each year, and you see in the media, for example, profile given to publications by the Auditor General, I think all of that contributes to that overarching framework of there are controls in place and there are consequences if money is not spent well. So I think it goes back to this is an overarching system with all the various different components that contribute. But absolutely, I think, and it was interesting listening to Ed's comments there. I think that all of those controls that we've heard about, both from Gareth and Sekani, give you a real confidence that ultimately, there is a strong reporting framework, and if there are problems, they will emerge and they will be reported on.
Thanks, Ian. A question from my experience in having worked with the public sector, not in the public sector, but one of the frustrations that I was exposed to, and this is both, it's international, is that the people on the ground find it's unable to discuss findings and create that understanding with the auditors on the ground. And it almost this inflexibility, and it's ticking the box, and I just want to tick the box. And as long as I can, juggle my information so that it ticks the box, then we're all good. But actually, I want to improve and I want to do better. How flexible, and this is to the two AGs, how flexible are the auditors on the ground to discussion and improvement rather than just ticking the box? Sekani, ladies first.
Okay, I'm happy to take it first. I found that our audit teams are very open to engaging with all our auditees throughout the audit process. The findings will remain, but they will engage to a point where there is common appreciation of what the facts are. And also they will work hard to ensure that they offer recommendations that are implementable and have the best chance of driving improvements. And sometimes it's, the issues are contested and there's many debates, and we welcome that because it makes our guys sharper. But there is an openness to engaging, and there's always a focus on ensuring that, yes, let's report transparently on what we found, but also give the type of recommendations that can drive the necessary improvements.
Thank you, Gareth.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, this goes right back to where Professor King started us this morning when he was contrasting conformance and performance. And clearly, sometimes an audit is about compliance with controls in a system, and that's a perfectly valid audit remit to have, and you should be kind of clear about that. But a lot of our work goes way, way beyond compliance with system controls, and that's where we need to be open to, first of all, how is that public service innovating to achieve better results? And that kind of process doesn't lend itself to a checklist in the same way. And this is a very live topic for us in the UK at the moment, where we are a caricature of audits generally, and including in the public sector, is that it can be a barrier to innovation because people are focused on demonstrating conformance and therefore putting less priority on innovation. And we're absolutely determined to try and get rid of that perception, which we think is more of a perception than a reality. But it's quite a damaging perception, because if people believe that's how they're going to be audited, they may behave accordingly. So we are trying to show through what we actually do that we really celebrate and value positive innovation where that's given better results for the public. And we don't just emphasize, high scores on compliance.
Thank you, Gareth. And you mentioned Prof. King, so perhaps a last question then from my side to Prof. King, from Terence, in terms of your recommendation that needs to be done to raise the governance competencies of, and in this case, South Africa, but generally elected officials to have oversight committees which are fit for purpose. What is your guidance in terms of the public sector and improving the governance competencies in the public sector?
Well, I think the more independent the persons are in the oversight committees, the better it is, because then you are seen to be impartial. And I think Gareth has made that point today. But one thing has not been raised and discussed, and that is that the IAASB has now started developing ISAs on sustainability reporting and to the standard of a reasonable assurance. But the problem is that a lot of government institutions, but also in the private sector, especially second-tier companies, Most companies listed on the London Stock Exchange or the Johannesburg Stock Exchange will be able to consult one of the big four to help them in sourcing data in order to comply with whatever standard the regulator is going to choose in South Africa or the UK. And as you know, there is what I've described as an eaten mess when it comes to sustainability standards. We've got double materiality standards in the European Union. And the European Union happens to be South Africa's largest trading partner. We've got the ISSB, and we follow the IASB standards, sibling standards, South Africa for financial reporting. We've got the ISSB, which is focused on outside in, the SASB standards. And so far has issued one standard on climate change and is still developing the other standards. So I think auditors are going to, the external auditor has got to take over almost an educational role to talk to the entity being audited as to how to source the data, that the data must be auditable and it must be reliable. Otherwise, you're going to have a difficulty auditing it in terms of the new standards set, which haven't been practiced yet. So that's something that's going to be faced over the next 2 years. And so in the public and private sectors, we're going to run into this difficulty. And I think second-tier companies and companies, small businesses, etc., with an accountant who's also a registered auditor and has been the auditor of that small company for the last 30 years, he or she has very little understanding about data involving sustainability issues, the sourcing of it, the reliability of it, and very little understanding of the standards being developed by the IAASB, which the PIOB, I'm using all these acronyms because I assume everybody knows it. The PIOB has actually started approving these things. So we've got over the next 2 years, auditors like Tsakani and Gareth, then in the private sector, auditors are going to have a difficulty. They've got to start educating their clients to make sure they get this auditable data in sustainability reporting, because I have no doubt that over the next 2 years, sustainability reporting will be mandated the same as financial reporting is.
Thank you very much for that. And I'd like to thank, especially from the operations of the Good Governance Academy, everybody, all our speakers, distinguished speakers today. It's been fabulous having you online, and just being able to engage with you and talk with your departments. It's really been a fantastic opportunity, and I'm really grateful for you having to come online and then engage with the audience online today. It's been really fabulous. The presentations are available online now. The colloquium recording will be on YouTube, as well as on a link to that available on the event page. And we will be, Prof. King and I will be summarizing this in a memorandum. We'll also be taking snippets of the really important things that have been said today and sharing those on LinkedIn and social media. So please follow us on that. And if you want to join all of the Good Governance Academy's events, or certainly just hear about them, please join our mailing list on the webpage. But with that, I'd like to hand over to our chair, Alan Johnson, to conclude this colloquium. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. So we started just under 3 hours ago. We had 540 participants. We got up to 665 at 12 o'clock Central European time. And just as I speak, we're at 535. So, you know, if you want to sort of look at a performance metric in terms of how successful any event is, it is about the participation and the attendance. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of you out there, including the few that have had to drop out for, obviously, they've got other things to get get doing for being part of this, because however well we might think we've done, we're here to serve you. So thank you very much. Let me sort of start also by thanking Mervyn, Professor Mervyn King, for your vision in setting up the Good Governance Academy 7 years ago. I mean, it's clearly that your inspiration, your leadership has raised the bar in terms of improving governance accountability in both the public and the private sector. And I'd like to recognize the great work that's being done. I know John has left us by the OECD and indeed the World Bank. Ed has also had to leave in establishing the frameworks to guide good decision-making and the behaviors. I also would like to recognize the outstanding work of the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board for the dedicated work in establishing high-quality public sector accounting standards and supporting, most importantly, their adoption and implementation across the world. And under Ian's leadership over the past 9 years, the SASB has accelerated its development and rollout of relevant standards. So Ian, thank you very much. And we're actually in the same hotel in different rooms, so we'll be sort of catching up with each other in a few moments. So Ian, thank you. It's been a pleasure. You know, I've had the pleasure to work with you while I was on the IFAC board for 7 years, and I really appreciate what you continue to do for the profession, and the dedication and what you've achieved in recent years. It's absolutely outstanding. And finally, my thanks. Thanks, Ian. And finally, my thanks to Kani and Gareth for your absolute commitment to serving the public by holding governments and public officials to account, ensuring that they uphold the highest standards of ethical behavior and decision-making. These tasks are not easy, as we've heard, but they are critical, and you do it with such grace and professionalism. You know, as I said earlier, if I was starting out again today, I probably would want to join your organizations, but sadly, that's not going to be possible. And of course, I would like to sort of say a big thank you to Carolyn, our CEO, for her dedicated leadership and enormous commitment to the work of the GGA and your outstanding outreach that you do to all of our supporters across the world. And of course, in the background, Evelyn's there sort of making all of this technology work and getting us all together. So Evelyn, thank you so much for that. So, I mean, to all of you, I really hope that today's colloquia that has, you know, focused on, you know, governance, accountability in the public sector is a recognition of the important role that the public sector can and does play in creating sustainable societies and economies that caters for the needs of all citizens and hopefully would lead to a more equitable society across the world. It is clearly important to me that the public sector is able to attract and retain the very best talent. And by hearing from Ian, from Sakani and Gareth, who are having very successful leadership careers in the public sector, as well as John and Ed, who have devoted their lives working to advance the public interest, I hope they've shown to all of you why the public sector matters in the lives of all of us. And as I said earlier, during our conversation, you know, I saw this firsthand when I was a non-executive director on the board of DFID in the UK. What attracted me was because of what it did, what excited me while I was there because of how it did it and the impact it had. So, you know, I call on everyone to advocate for the need to make the public sector an attractive place to work. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to all of the participants for today's colloquia. And of course, this is number 12. There will be number 13 coming up in 6 months' time, and you'll be hearing more from Carolyn on that in due course. So for all of you, have a good rest of the morning wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. And of course, we have lots of people also in Asia, and I really appreciate the time difference that, you know, where you are, it's late into the day for you. So thank you very much for joining us.